Since February 15th, Libyan civilians have flocked to the streets in defiant and jubilant calls for reforms at first and now for all-out regime change, and an echo of similar triumphant calls in Tunis and Egypt. Yesterday, Muammar al-Gaddafi, Libya's leader since a military coup in 1969 and the longest-serving non-monarchical head of state in the Arab world, declared that he would remain in power until the very last bullet. Sadly, this is a real threat in light of the death toll of Libyan civilians in recent days. As of February 21st, 2011, the International Coalition Against War Criminals has reported 519 deaths, 3,980 wounded, and at least 1,500 missing in Libya since the start. The numbers that are being reported by Libyans on the ground are much higher, with thousands more injured. With us to discuss these recent protests and Libya more generally is Professor Ali Ahmida, Chair of the Department of Political Science at the University of New England. He's the author of The Making of Modern Libya, State Formation, Colonization, and Resistance. Welcome, Professor Ahmida.
Thank you, Nora.
Let me begin by asking you to give us an overview of recent events that began on the 15th in context of what's been termed as the Arab Spring. A few weeks ago, you commented that unlike Tunis and Egypt, Libya does not have the same potential for revolution because, quote, you said, Libya has no political parties which were banned and no trade unions. In addition, Libyan regional and tribal identities are strong and still active, so civil society is really weakened. Can you explain to us what has changed since then?
Well, I think we have two major events. Instead of responding in a positive way and admitting that there are legitimate demands by the people who demonstrated in Benghazi and Al-Baida, and trying to push reforms and negotiations to address all the bad harvests of the last 20 years, the regime did something really was very, very unusual. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's son, who has been leading the so-called reform faction within the regime, spoke in a very, very insulting, threatening tone. Instead of admitting the mistakes, giving condolences to the one who were killed by the security forces and the mercenaries, he began to threaten people and say either us, me and my father, and the regime itself, or anarchy, destruction of Libya, a bleak future, a apocalyptic situation where the Western powers will come to Libya to colonize Libya again. So he used this very draconian, very, very bleak picture, and it's nothing really has to do with the realities on the ground, where people wanted to say admitting mistakes, admitting killing, abuses of power, corruption, repression, the hollowness of the whole experiment of the Jamahiriya state, all the things that most Libyans knew that time. His tone was completely off, and he began to threaten people and to use a language of really declaring war. Either you comply to us, or we're gonna burn the whole country, and a civil war is gonna come. And he branded the opposition forces, the democratic forces, and the people who oppose the regime in the eastern region, in using a usual language that's is so common to the regime. Either there are extremist Islamists who are going to declare a jihadi emirate, Islamic emirate in Darna and also in Al-Baida, or they are seceding from the rest of Libya, playing on the really eastern region uncomfortable situation within the Libyan regime, and also the fact that a few voices of the frustration called for the secession of Barqa or Cyrenaica from the rest of Libya. And also he tried to convey that these are also the people who protested against the state and took over the city of Benghazi, Baida, and Derna, and Tobruk are actually a bunch of drunken hoodlums, ones who are using drugs and hallucination, pills, and went on and on and on. So the speech itself was very shocking and closed the door for a golden opportunity, maybe a lost opportunity, to negotiate a peaceful resolution some of some of the urgent grievances about corruption, about human rights, about degradation of lives, about unemployment, about the Bustin massacre in 1996, about the fact that the whole institutions, public institutions in Libya, have been decaying, including education and health, and not to deal with all of these urgent day-to-day matters to ordinary Libyans, and began to threaten and also warn people that if they continue this way, they're going to be really burned. And basically, not only this, they're going to burn Libya, and Libya are going to be going back to the Stone Age, and the Western power is going to come to colonize you. As this speech, closed the doors for reforms and negotiations, I think a lot of people began to get very angry. They even responded to him and throw their shoes at his picture and also in the TV stations. And I think that hardened situation more, and people began to call for toppling the regime. And which is very, very typical of any social movement. If you wait for a long time for reform to take place, one thing, and I don't think people are going to march in the streets easily, but as these groups in eastern Libya began to realize that this is not a call for conversation and dialogue, but for threatening and warning them to line up, and I think that hardened stance, and people began to say no. It's there's no chance for reform. Now it's a chance for just it's a hopeless attempt. We waited for a long time, and we're calling for the regime to be toppled, and we have a new order in Libya.